children of combat veterans stuck in the middle of a political back and forth in Raleigh.
Yeah, this as a state agency withholds millions of dollars that's supposed to be paying to help children of service members killed or wounded in combat pay for college. WBTV's chief investigative reporter Nick Ochsner is here now with details of the latest disagreement that's leaving children of our nation's heroes in financial limbo. Nick?
Yeah, Jamie, Maureen, the North Carolina Scholarship for Children of Wartime Veterans is supposed to pay tuition to any community college, public or private university in the state for children of veterans who fought in war. It's administered by the North Carolina Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. That agency sent a letter last month saying it couldn't pay the scholarships until further notice because of the budget standoff between the legislative Republicans and Democrat Governor Roy Cooper. But nonpartisan researchers at the General Assembly say that's just not true. This letter, sent in mid-September by the North Carolina Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, is pretty clear. It says scholarships for children of wartime veterans wouldn't be paid until further notice. The reason, it says, because the state budget hadn't been approved by the General Assembly. There still haven't been any checks cut.
I'd say that's ridiculous. You know, we're operating on a continuing resolution where we've got money that's available.
State Senator Danny Britt, a Republican and combat veteran who still serves in the North Carolina National Guard, says the reasoning outlined in the letter from DMVA just doesn't make sense.
They're not paying it for politics, and they're using these children of veterans to make political points.
First of all, it should not be a political issue. Again, the budget, it was put in the governor's budget. They did it last year. Seemed like it would be a point of agreement.
Larry Hall is the Secretary of Military and Veterans Affairs. A decorated Marine, Hall said his agency intends to get the scholarships paid, but struggled to explain why his office hadn't paid the money in the first place.
They know the money is coming. They've been informed it would be delayed some.
The nonpartisan staff at the General Assembly says that there's no reason why you couldn't pay your scholarships this semester. They say that you have the same amount of appropriation that you had in last year's budget because it continues. They say that it wasn't one-time funds. That's the nonpartisan staff. Would you say that's not accurate?
Well, I'm not sure what their interpretation of it is. I'm sure that we usually pay by the end of the first semester, and so we're going to pay based on the funds we have available.
Hall couldn't give a specific date when the money would be paid, nor would his office provide information about the number of students awaiting the scholarship funds. In the meantime, students and their families who've already sacrificed so much for their country will continue to wait in limbo.
These children of veterans are stuck there because that's where the Department of Veteran and Military Affairs have put them.
Now, it's also worth pointing out the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs has spent nearly $24 million in recurring funds authorized by last year's budget on other things that don't include scholarships for these wartime veterans' children. We've posted more details about the budget back and forth online at WBTV.com. Maureen and Jamie, back to you.
Hundreds of children of military veterans, including children whose parents were injured or killed in combat, have been thrust into limbo in recent weeks as the North Carolina Department of Military and Veteran Affairs announced a last-minute cut to the amount of money it would provide as part of a state-funded scholarship.
We first told you in late October the scholarship for children of military veterans hadn't been paid this semester despite millions of dollars sitting in the bank to cover the costs. At the time, DMVA Secretary Larry Hall said the money would be paid by the end of the semester. But as students prepare to take their final exams starting next week, they still haven't paid.
WBTV's chief investigative reporter Nick Ochsner is asking our state's leaders in Raleigh why they're letting a political fight leave these deserving students in limbo. Nick?
Well, Jamie, Maureen, North Carolina's scholarship for children of wartime veterans covers tuition, room, and board for students whose parents were killed in action who served in combat. 2 weeks ago, the State Department of Military and Veterans Affairs told those students and their families their room and board allowance was being cut virtually in half, despite the fact that their schools had already credited them the full amount.
Yeah. Depends on what time it is, I guess. I mean,
Michaela Luke is a junior at East Carolina University. She's pre-med, is in the honors program, and is a campus tour guide. And she sings.
we're here because I spend a lot of time here as a music minor. I'm a voice student here.
You can see her performing in this cell phone video her parents shot. A big reason she chose to study at ECU was because the cost of her education would be covered by the North Carolina Scholarship for Children of Wartime Veterans.
That was a big part of it.
How big of a help has that been?
The biggest. I wouldn't have, it pays my entire tuition, all of my room and board, so I wouldn't have money to pay for any of that. I'd be thousands of dollars in debt.
Michaela has her dad, Jim Luke, to thank.
Served in the Air Force, active duty, deployed to Desert Storm, and yeah, so it's a nice thank you, if you will, from the state.
Both Jim and his wife Teresa say the scholarship's been invaluable.
She may be able to graduate debt-free. Like, what amazing gift. Neither one of us have college education, so these are the first generation. Right. So we were thrilled.
But just a few weeks ago, as the semester was coming to a close and Michaela was preparing for final exams, she and her family got a letter from ECU saying her room and board allowance had been cut nearly in half. She'd have to pay back $1,300 to the school, and she'll have just half the amount she budgeted for the spring semester, too.
What is going on? Like, this is crazy that they're doing this to these kids.
What was your all's reaction when you first heard about it?
Oh, it's like what to do, you know. We got to dig into retirement savings, or we're going to have to dig into our emergency fund.
The Department of Military and Veterans Affairs sent this memo to schools on November 22nd, saying they had to cut room and board because Republican lawmakers didn't give the agency an extra $2.4 million the department got last year, on top of the $9 million already set aside for the fund. The memo says scholarship costs continue to rise, but this chart provided by a department spokeswoman shows the total number of students receiving the scholarship this school year is actually down over each of the previous 2 years.
It was like my whole life was kind of thrown into the balance now.
Michaela's trying to figure out how to afford to pay back the money ECU says she owes and survive on half the budget she planned for the spring semester.
I have to think about rent. How am I going to pay that? Am I going to have to move my savings around for next semester? I'm going to have to move apartments probably next year to make it a little bit cheaper, stick to a stricter budget, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like thrown on, and it's final season.
Secretary Larry Hall, a Democrat appointed by Governor Roy Cooper to head the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, refused repeated requests for an on-camera interview for this story. Michaela and her parents hope he does something to help ease the burden his agency has placed on her and other students whose parents have fought and died for our country.
This is ridiculous. You're messing with people's lives in order to just prove a point, and that doesn't make any sense at all, and it's not fair to you or for us.
Now, late this afternoon, I got a statement from the chairman of the UNC Board of Governors saying the UNC System Office has instructed its schools, including ECU, to not penalize students for the last-minute change in the room and board allowance. The statement said in part, quote, "The children of wartime veterans should not be used as political pawns for budget negotiations." Guys, hopefully this is an issue that someone in Raleigh can work out soon. Back to you.
Good work getting some action done there for those people who we owe a great debt of thanks to.
I mean, and who's prepared to handle us on a $1,300 bill
Right.
landing on your doorstep here right at the end of the semester?
Especially
I mean, it's so unfair.
when she's thinking about finals and she's trying to move
Outrageous.
on.
It really is. Documents show House Speaker Tim Moore ignored months of requests to increase funding for a scholarship for children of wartime veterans.
We told you Monday that Governor Roy Cooper ordered the state's Department of Military and Veterans Affairs to pay the full amount of a room and board allowance promised to scholarship recipients, a move that came days after a WBTV investigation. Well, now our chief investigative reporter Nick Oxner has found leaders warned top lawmakers in the state house of the consequences of not approving the extra money months before the scholarships were cut. He joins us now. Nick?
Yeah, Maureen, Jamie, the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs told students the week of Thanksgiving it would have to cut room and board allowance nearly in half, and students would be on the hook to make up the difference. Emails the department produced late last week show senior staff told House Speaker Tim Moore that very thing would happen if an extra $2.4 million wasn't approved to help fund the scholarship. But the speaker wouldn't give any extra money, and DMVA, for some reason, didn't tell students until months later.
Given the what time it is, I guess.
2 weeks ago, Michaela Luke, a student at ECU whose father went to war in the Air Force, was worried about paying for living expenses after her state-funded scholarship was cut without warning.
I have to think about rent. How am I going to pay that? Am I going to have to move my savings around for next semester? I'm going to have to move apartments probably next year to make it a little bit cheaper, stick to a stricter budget, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like thrown on, and it's final season.
She was worried and angry at the politicians in Raleigh who put her in the position.
This is ridiculous. You're messing with people's lives in order to just prove a point, and that doesn't make any sense at all, and it's not fair to you or for us.
On Monday, Governor Roy Cooper ordered DMVA to borrow money set aside for spring scholarships to pay the full amount of the room and board allowance promised to students like Michaela Luke in the fall.
The department should have informed students in the schools earlier that, hey, this money's in flux. You may not be able to get it.
Why did it take your office so long to make that move?
Well, first, the General Assembly had continued to promise that they were going to fully fund these scholarships all the way up to Thanksgiving.
Now, Cooper says, lawmakers will have to approve more money to cover the shortfall.
The General Assembly needs to keep its word and come back and fully fund these scholarships for next year.
This is something we need to do for these students of these veterans.
House Speaker Tim Moore says the legislature will work to appropriate the extra funds when it reconvenes in January. But Moore couldn't answer our questions about why his office ignored requests for additional money months ago, when his office was warned about what would happen if the legislature didn't renew a one-time appropriation for extra money passed last year. This email from DMVA Deputy Secretary Martin Falls to one of Moore's top aides in July, as the budget was being finalized, spells out exactly why the department needed the additional funds again this year. Falls sent another email to the aide in early October, again pressing for the money, this time saying he'd made his case directly to Moore, too. Nothing happened.
As I said, the last time this happened was something that I actually pushed because this is so vital.
So the question still begs, if this was so critical and if your office got this $2.4 million from the year before, why not even at least include it in your budget proposal for this year, which you didn't do, to make sure that this money had a shot at being reappropriated again?
It was the way it was prioritized.
I asked for it in my budget. The Department of Military and Veterans Affairs asked for it in their budget. It was not in the main budget that the General Assembly is continuing to try to get the veto override. It was not in any of the many budget bills. It's unconscionable that it wasn't, but it wasn't.
What would you say to the families who've been impacted and scrambling for money as a result of this, regardless of whose fault it is?
You deserve this money, and it's one of the reasons that I stepped into this and said, okay, it's time to set all this stuff aside and make sure they get the money.
Now we have much more of our interview with both Governor Cooper and Speaker Moore online at WBTV.com, including a new proposal by Moore that would take the administration of this scholarship out of the governor's hands. Guys, back to you.
A WBTV investigation continues prompting reaction from state leaders in Raleigh. We've learned today legislative leaders will move to appropriate an additional $2.4 million to fund scholarships for children of wartime veterans. This is an issue Chief Investigative Reporter Nick Oxner has been on top of for months now. He is here now to tell us what the latest developments means for those students. Nick, what's the progress?
Well, Maureen, you'll recall just before Thanksgiving when more than 1,000 students whose parents fought and in some cases were injured or died in combat were told their room and board allowance for this school year would be cut in half, leaving many students and families scrambling late in the semester to make up the difference. Weeks after our story aired, Governor Roy Cooper said he was directing the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs to pay the full room and board allowance, even though that would leave the fund short millions of dollars for the spring semester. But today I received a draft copy of a bill that will be introduced in the North Carolina House of Representatives next week that would appropriate an additional $2.5 million to make up the shortfall. It's expected to be taken up in the House, passed, and moved to the Senate in a likely one-day session this coming Tuesday. This means students and families will get the full amount of scholarship funds they were promised at the start of this school year. Of course, I'll be in Raleigh next week as lawmakers approve this additional money.